Epic Roast Guy. Epic Roast Guy.
Welcome back. It's another exciting episode of the Original Geeks podcast. I am Ian Daddy Bones. I'd like to welcome everybody to the show. Thank you very much for being an upgraded Patreon subscriber. I'm going to make sure your extra $4 a month is going to be well worth it. So we're going to get right into it with the show. I do got to admit, this is my second attempt doing this show. I already recorded myself talking about the Original Geeks podcast and what the original version of the show used to be, and basically gave the story about that. But looking back on the footage, the more I thought about it, I was basically giving too much credit to people that weren't bringing anything to the table. So I basically just fucking scrapped it and decided, you know what, I don't need to tell this story right now. This isn't how I want to bring the show back. The only thing you need to know going forward with the Original Geeks podcast being back on Patreon is I started it in 2007. I pulled the plug in 2016 due to website compromises and issues with malware and whatnot, and basically everything that I had backed up on the server from episode 1 to 232 got completely compromised and infected with like digital AIDS. So I lost everything. Didn't capitalize on YouTube back in the day because I didn't really understand YouTube's potential, and I instead of having every episode of the Original Geeks podcast backed up on this channel, I don't. However, I'm going through some burned CDs that I have from over the years, and I know I backed up some episodes of the Original Geeks podcast, so I'm trying to salvage everything that I could find from the original incarnation of the show. I don't know if I'm going to be able to start things off with episode number 1. It may pick up with like episode number 25. But either way, I'm doing what I can to try and bring the Original Geeks podcast back to this YouTube channel, which is housing this Patreon bonus footage until I get my Patreon account changed around for some reason. And when I originally set up my Patreon, I had it in like adults only mode, and because of that I can't upload videos directly, so I had to submit a request to Patreon, and I'm waiting for them to fix that shit so I can just upload directly. So basically at its peak, the Original Geeks podcast was syndicated worldwide in over 25 countries on iTunes. We had over 150,000 listeners worldwide, and at the end of it, every episode was at least getting downloaded between 9 to 11,000 times a fucking episode. So my numbers were really great at the fucking tail end of it. I actually wound up selling more merchandise in the 1 year that I was completely unproductive with the Original Geeks podcast. And yeah, basically with the way the Original Geeks podcast ended and the way I shifted on to another project that basically blew up in my face, I basically was in my head for a good 5 years just being pissed off and bitter over shit that wasn't my fault. And basically one of those situations where you get labeled the asshole for calling out other assholes for being fucking assholes. So that's basically what it was. So I didn't do shit for 5 years. And I decided to, get back on my feet making content with Ian versus Daddy Bones. And basically with all the momentum and all the fun I've been having doing Ian versus Daddy Bones, and with the fact that I got people supporting me on Patreon and rooting for me in the background, I decided what better way than to bring back the Original Geeks podcast. So that's what I'm going to be doing going forward. So that's basically the short end of what I spent an hour talking about before I'm like, you know what, fuck it, I could do better with this shit. These people are paying me $4 extra a month. They don't want to. They don't want to sit there and watch me sit here and bitch. So, with that said, let's get started with the Original Geeks podcast. Now, in the time that I spent trying to bring this show back, I meant to bring this back in April, around WrestleMania weekend. Unfortunately, I threw out my back. They had me incapacitated for like 2 days, barely able to walk around, and it totally fucking sucked. I had to go to a chiropractor that my boss paid for just to help me out. and which is why I really need your support. So maybe next time I can afford my own chiropractor visit.